February 1983, Los Angeles, 6 weeks after Thriller hit the shelves. The album was moving faster than anyone at Epic had quietly projected. But that night, in a rented hall on the west side of the city, with maybe 500 people inside, nobody was talking about charts. This was a private gathering, invitation only, the kind of room where people in the music industry come to eat and say things they would never say in a meeting. Executives who competed against each other every other night of the week stood in small clusters, laughing too loud, pretending the industry was smaller and friendlier than it actually was. Michael was there as a guest, not a performer, not the reason anyone had written the date on their calendar. He sat near the back in dark clothes with a hat pulled low, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, carefully like he was memorizing it in case he needed to find the exit later. A few people had spotted him on the way in and spoken briefly, but he was not the kind of person who required constant tending. He was fine with the edges of a room. James Brown arrived the way James Brown always arrived. Late enough that people noticed, early enough that it couldn't be called rude. He worked the room for 20 minutes before anybody handed him a microphone, and when they did, he held it the way someone holds something they invented and are mildly surprised to find in someone else's hands. He talked about the old days, about playing gospel before anyone knew his name, about churches in Georgia where the summer air was so thick it pressed against your chest, where the fans on the ceiling moved so slowly they seemed purely decorative, and where the singing was the only thing that actually moved. He had a way of telling those stories that made you feel like you owed him something by the end of them, that his past had done some work on your behalf without you even asking. Then he stopped mid-sentence. He turned and looked toward the back of the room, and when he found Michael, he didn't look away. "I want to say something about this young man right here." 500 people turned around. Michael didn't move. "I taught this boy everything he knows. The footwork, the spin, how to hold a crowd so they don't look away even when nothing is happening on stage." He paused long enough that the silence started to feel like a physical thing in the room rather than just the absence of sound. "But there is one thing I never taught him, because you cannot teach it. Either it is in you or it is not." He pointed directly at Michael. "Michael Jackson, when was the last time you sang something your mother taught you? Not for a record, not for a camera, just your voice and whatever God decided to put inside you. Right here, right now, in front of these people." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that settles over a place when everyone in it decides at the same moment to pay full attention to what is about to happen. Michael sat with his hands flat on his knees. He had not sung that music in years. Not because he had forgotten it. He hadn't forgotten a single word. But because that music came attached to something he hadn't figured out how to carry in public. His mother used to sing, "His Eye is on the Sparrow" at Kingdom Hall every Sunday, loud and without any self-consciousness. The way people sing when they actually believe the words they're singing, rather than just performing them. Michael would sit beside her when he was small and watch her face while she sang it. That face was the most certain thing he had ever seen in his life. There was no calculation in it, no awareness of the people around her, just the song and what she meant by it. He hadn't been inside a Kingdom Hall in years. The distance between who he was now and those Sunday mornings had been growing so steadily he had almost stopped measuring it. The music had stayed with him in pieces. A melody that surfaced sometimes in the shower, a lyric that came back unexpectedly on a long drive. But he had never let those pieces gather into anything he was willing to show anyone. Some things you protect by keeping them private. He had been protecting this one for a long time. He stood up. Nobody in the room made a sound. The walk from his seat to the stage was maybe 40 feet. He didn't rush it. He moved the way someone moves when they have made a decision and are giving themselves the few seconds between the decision and the action to make absolutely sure they mean it. Some people near the aisle stepped back slightly to let him through, the instinctive thing people do when they sense that whatever is about to happen, they should not be standing in the middle of it. James Brown was waiting at the edge of the stage. He took Michael's hand, pulled him up with one firm motion, and leaned close enough that only Michael could hear what he said next. "Everyone in this room has buried something. "You're just going first." Michael stepped up to the microphone. He turned toward the musicians, standing at the side of the stage, and shook his head once. No accompaniment. They sat back down without a word, reading it immediately. He held the microphone with both hands. He found a spot on the back wall and fixed his eyes on it. He opened his mouth and the first line came out cracked. Not cracked the way an untrained voice cracks. Cracked the way something cracks when the pressure inside it gets too large for what is holding it together. The note was correct. The pitch was there. But the voice behind it was carrying more than the melody, and anyone in that hall could hear the weight in it if they were paying any kind of attention. He kept going anyway. The second line was steadier. Not smooth, steadier. There is a difference worth naming. Smooth means controlled. Steady means you decided to keep moving even though your hands are not entirely still. Michael kept moving. By the third line, something shifted in the room. It would be easy to reach for large language to describe what that shift felt like, but the honest version is smaller than that. People stopped glancing at the person next to them. They just stopped. That is all. They looked at the stage and they stayed there. James Brown stood at the side with his arms at his sides. He was watching Michael the way you watch someone you recognize. Not someone famous, someone real. He had heard thousands of singers in his life, in churches, in clubs, on records, in stadiums. He knew the difference between a performance and a confession. What was happening in front of him right now was not a performance. He lasted maybe 90 seconds before he moved. He didn't announce it, didn't gesture to the crowd or make anything of the moment for himself. He walked quietly to the edge of the microphone and started singing underneath Michael's voice, softly, almost below what the room needed to hear him, just enough presence to be there. His voice was rough where Michael's was clear, wide where Michael's was precise, and together they produced something that sounded like it had existed long before either of them was born. Michael heard him come in and didn't look over. He just kept going. Near the left side of the stage, Stevie Wonder had gone completely still. He had stopped mid-sentence to the person beside him the moment Michael's voice broke on that opening note. He stood with his head tilted slightly forward, the way he listened when something was worth the full weight of his attention. He didn't move again until the song was finished. The room held its quiet all the way through to the final line. When the last note ended, Michael kept his eyes closed for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at James Brown. Not at the audience, at James Brown. 500 people rose to their feet. The applause didn't come. It simply didn't arrive. They stood the way you stand at a graveside when the words are finished and nobody's quite ready to walk back to the parking lot. Not because anyone told them to, because sitting felt like the wrong response to what they had just been present for. James Brown crossed the stage and put both arms around Michael. He didn't say anything at first. When he pulled back, his eyes were red at the edges, and he wasn't making any effort to hide it. "I didn't think you were going to come up there," he said. Michael looked at the floor for a second. "I wasn't sure I was either." They stood in that for a moment without filling it with anything. Outside the door, the sound of the evening carrying on, glasses, voices, music from a speaker somewhere, seemed to belong to a completely different kind of night. Later backstage, in a small room with the door pulled shut against the rest of the evening, James Brown sat on the edge of a folding chair and said something he had not planned to say when the night started. He said that the churches he grew up around used to tell people the voice was on loan, that whatever you built on a stage, however many records you sold, the voice was not yours to keep permanently. You were holding it for something larger than yourself. And the day you forgot that, you didn't lose the voice in any way a doctor could measure. You lost it in the way that actually mattered. It stopped telling the truth and started just producing sound that people applauded. He said he could hear in Michael's last note that he had remembered. Michael was quiet for a while. Then he said that his mother used to stand in that hall and sing that song like she meant every single word of it, not performing it for the people sitting around her, actually meaning it down to the syllables. And after he stopped going, he had assumed the song stayed behind in that building, like it belonged to her and to that chapter of his life, and he didn't have the right to carry it somewhere else. James Brown nodded slowly. "It followed you," he said. "That kind of music doesn't stay behind where you left it. You don't carry it. It carries you." No recording from that night was ever officially released. Some audio circulated in small circles for years. Low quality, the crowd noise bleeding into the vocals, James Brown's voice and Michael's difficult to separate in the mix. But every person who has heard even that rough version describes the same thing. Not the technical quality of what happened, the opposite. The specific texture of a voice stripped of all the distance that a finished record puts between the singer and the person listening. Michael Jackson had 33 number 1 singles. He sold more records than any other artist on the planet through the 1980s. He could move 100,000 people in an open-air stadium with a single movement of his hand. That February night, he stood in front of 500 people with no band behind him and a first note that broke in half on its way out. And it was the most honest sound anyone in that room ever heard from him. James Brown went back to his hotel later that evening and called his sister in Georgia. He didn't explain why he was calling at that hour. He just asked if she still remembered the words to "His Eye is on the Sparrow." She said of course she did. She sounded slightly puzzled by the question, but she didn't push on it. He asked her to sing it for him over the phone. She did, all the way through without rushing it. He didn't say anything when she finished. He sat with it for a few seconds. Then he thanked her, and he hung up. Some things you think you left behind in a building. Then one night someone stands up in a room and shows you that those things have been traveling with you the whole time, waiting for the right person to ask the right question. That is what James Brown did in that hall in February 1983. He didn't put anything into Michael Jackson that night. He just dared him to stop pretending it wasn't already there.